In a past life, after Ji Wenlin found out I was pregnant, he took Bai Xiaomai and disappeared for 20 years. Later, when I was on the verge of death, he returned. He looked at Bai Xiaomai's portrait and said to me, if we had waited a little longer to get our marriage certificate, would the outcome have been different? When I realized I had been reborn, Ji Wenlin was standing at the dormitory door, waiting for me to go get our marriage license together. I lied, saying I had to drop something off for a colleague, and sent him ahead to wait for me at the marriage registration office. After parting ways with Ji Wenlin, I went up the mountain. Lying in Aunt Wang's rocking chair, I watched the sea of clouds in front of the house and basked in the sun. Aunt Wang handed me a baked sweet potato and asked curiously, weren't you supposed to register your marriage with engineer Ji today? Why are you here? I took a bite of the warm baked sweet potato. Smiling, I told her, Auntie, I had a nightmare, and I've been feeling uneasy since I woke up. Aunt Wang comforted me, saying, it was just a dream. What matters is real life. Once you and engineer Ji are married, you'll have a good life ahead of you. What's there to fear from a nightmare? I paused for a moment, then nodded with a smile. You're right, Auntie. I'll just stay here for a bit and then leave. Marry Ji Wenlin? That's impossible in this lifetime. In my past life, after Ji Wenlin and I had just picked up our marriage certificate and stepped out of the registry office, he bumped into a young woman. Her name was Bai Xiaomai, and she lived in the village where we worked. On the way back together, Ji Wenlin remained silent the whole time. I assumed it was because, as a married man, he felt a sense of propriety about keeping his distance from other women. Little did I know, until I was on my deathbed. It turned out that, at the moment of that collision, Ji Wenlin had fallen in love with Bai Xiaomai at first sight. He wasn't trying to avoid suspicion, he was filled with regret. He regretted not waiting just one more day to register our marriage with me. After that day, Ji Wenlin grew much colder toward me. He would always sit alone, staring blankly in the direction of the village. When I asked him why, he avoided answering. After asking him many times, and with my own work keeping me busy, I stopped asking. I'll just wait until he's sorted things out and is willing to talk to me on his own. After the village project wrapped up, Ji Wenlin and I were assigned to different project teams. We had no choice but to live apart. I thought it was only temporary, but with every subsequent assignment, he was sent to the other side of the country. I mentioned it to Ji Wenlin, but he simply replied, I'll follow the organization's arrangements. Until one day, when I returned to Beijing for a performance review, it was only when I overheard my colleagues talking that I realized, apart from that first time we were assigned to different places, every subsequent assignment was the result of Ji Wenlin actively requesting it from his superiors. Ji Wenlin and I had a huge fight. Afterward, he held me and apologized, but he never explained why. At daybreak, Ji Wenlin left. I thought our marriage was over. Unexpected things always happen when you least expect them. I was pregnant. Upon learning of my pregnancy, Ji Wenlin completely changed his previous cold demeanor. He began to take thoughtful care of me. He would clumsily try to cook for me. He'd press his ear against my belly to listen to the baby's heartbeat. He would take me for a walk every night. Then one day, Ji Wenlin suddenly disappeared. I asked so many people and searched for him for a long time. No one knew where he had gone, and no one could tell me whether he was alive or dead. I started going to prenatal checkups alone, giving birth alone, taking the child to the hospital alone, and raising the child alone. I arranged the funerals for both sets of parents all by myself. I thought he was dead, but just as I was on my deathbed, he suddenly appeared before me. It was only then that I realized he had been with Bai Xiaomai all these 20 years. They adopted a son and poured all their love into him, but Bai Xiaomai, weighed down by sorrow, passed away before him. Her final regret was that she had never been able to become his wife in her lifetime. Ji Wenlin said he felt guilty toward me, yet also resented me. I thought that made no sense at all. If he didn't love me, why didn't he tell me sooner? He could have easily divorced me and given Bai Xiaomai a home, instead of abandoning his wife and child and neglecting his parents. What right does he have to resent me? My own son, whom I raised with my own two hands, told me he envies Ji Wenlin and Bai Xiaomai's adopted son, who grew up showered with love. He resents me for bringing him into this world without his permission. It was only then that I realized he had already been in contact with his father all along, without my knowledge, and had kept it a secret from me. I stayed at Aunt Wang's house for an hour. After saying goodbye to Aunt Wang, I headed straight to the marriage registration office. When I arrived at the marriage registration office, I happened to see Ji Wenlin helping Bai Xiaomai to her feet. I saw Ji Wenlin staring at Bai Xiaomai, unable to tear his gaze away for a long time. A look of astonishment replaced the anger that had been on his face. In my previous life, I was too busy helping Bai Xiaomai up and chatting with her. I hadn't noticed anything unusual about Ji Wenlin. Now, looking at it from the perspective of a bystander, it turns out everything was so obvious. Wenlin, I'm here. You must have been waiting impatiently, right? When he saw me, Ji Wenlin froze, then quickly became flustered. Manman, you're here. I noticed that when Bai Xiaomai looked at me, unlike in my previous life, her expression was complex. Was there a hint of jealousy and resentment in her eyes? By the time I looked back at her, she had already returned to normal, as if it had all been a figment of my imagination. I was curious. We hadn't even obtained our marriage certificate yet in this life. Ji Wenlin had met Bai Xiaomai earlier. How would he choose? Would he break up with me and choose Bai Xiaomai? Or would he continue as he did in the past life, getting married to me while secretly living with Bai Xiaomai? It's getting late. Let's go inside and get married. I pretended to be in a hurry. Ji Wenlin's face went pale. Ouch, my foot hurts. Bai Xiaomai cried out in pain at just the right moment, breaking the brief silence. In my previous life, Bai Xiaomai wasn't injured. Why was she injured in this life, and at such a convenient moment? Could it be that she's been reborn too? I looked at Bai Xiaomai, scrutinizing her, but I didn't notice anything unusual. Ji Wenlin took Bai Xiaomai to the clinic. The doctor said there was nothing wrong with her, except for a wound that would have healed if it had been just a little later. Bai Xiaomai blushed. Ji Wenlin, however, looked pleased. On their way back, they passed by the marriage registration office. Ji Wenlin looked conflicted. Manman, they've closed for the day. Why don't we come back tomorrow? I replied casually, we'll see. We need to pick an auspicious day to get the certificate, but there would never be a suitable day for getting married in this lifetime. A faint smile played at the corners of my lips. Ji Wenlin sighed. All right, I'll tell Aunt Wang when we get back. Ji Wenlin and I had come by bicycle. On the way back, Bai Xiaomai got into Ji Wenlin's car without hesitation. Ji Wenlin looked at me, looking a bit awkward, but he didn't refuse. I pretended not to notice and rode off on my bicycle first. A cool breeze blew by, carrying the sound of Bai Xiaomai and Ji Wenlin talking. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I could tell they were happy, and Ji Wenlin's laughter, which he was deliberately holding back. How long had it been since I'd seen Ji Wenlin smile? In my past life, it seemed that after meeting Bai Xiaomai, Ji Wenlin never smiled at me again, but now, none of that matters to me anymore. When we entered the village, the villagers saw Bai Xiaomai sitting in Ji Wenlin's car. One arm was draped around Ji Wenlin's waist. When they looked at me, they either winked or coughed and shook their heads. I knew what they were trying to say, but I still smiled as I walked back to the dorm. In preparation for the wedding, Ji Wenlin had already rented a wedding home in advance. Most of their belongings had already been moved there. I passed by the apartment and stopped to take a look. The apartment had 2 bedrooms on either side, a living room in the middle, and a small courtyard. In my previous life, after returning from the marriage registration office, I saw the bright red, double happiness character pasted on the door and felt nothing but sweetness in my heart. No one could have known that the day before we got our marriage certificate, the groom was happily busy decorating the bridal chamber. Yet on our wedding night, the flame went out. That night was just like the countless lonely nights that followed. We lay quietly in bed, doing nothing, yet neither of us could fall asleep. Before Ji Wenlin returned, I pushed my bicycle back to the dormitory. As soon as I arrived at the dorm, I took out the transfer order to Beijing from my drawer. Though it was called a transfer, what awaited me back in Beijing was actually a promotion and a raise. In my previous life, I had given up this opportunity because I was going to marry Ji Wenlin. 3 months later, we were assigned to different posts. After that, Ji Wenlin deliberately kept me at arm's length. Later, when I became pregnant, Ji Wenlin disappeared. Not only did I have to raise the child on my own, but I also had to care for both sets of parents. I couldn't keep up at work and was gradually transferred from a key department to a marginal one. I never received a promotion or a raise my entire career. Whenever my son, who was in elementary school, saw me looking so ordinary and busy, he would always look at me with disdain. He'd say, "Other moms are all so pretty. Why can't you be like everyone else, and dress yourself up properly?" By what? By Xiaomai? The more I think back, the more my heart races. It turns out that even back then, my son had already been in contact with his missing father, yet he kept it a secret from me his whole life. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. At dinner time, Ji Wenlin didn't come looking for me like he usually did. I took my lunchbox to the cafeteria to get my meal. In the cafeteria, I saw Ji Wenlin and Bai Xiaomai sitting across from each other. They were serving food to each other. I don't know what Ji Wenlin said, but Bai Xiaomai covered her mouth and laughed. When he saw me, Ji Wenlin looked startled for a moment, then hurriedly stood up. "Manman, you're here." Xiaomai just got home, and there's nothing to eat at her place, so I brought her over to grab a bite. I was actually planning to get you a portion later, but I didn't expect you to be here so early. Early? There weren't many people left in the cafeteria. There were hardly any dishes left. I couldn't help but think of my past life. After we got our marriage certificate, Ji Wenlin said he was going to the cafeteria to get some food, but I waited until very late for him to come back. When he came back, his hands were empty. He just said to me matter-of-factly, "The cafeteria ran out of food. Just tough it out for the night." That night, if there was any sound at all, it must have been the rumbling of my empty stomach. It turns out that at this very moment in my past life, Ji Wenlin had already started taking care of Bai Xiaomai. I said nothing as I walked past him. I scraped together the leftover food and packed it up to take back to the dorm. I was just halfway through my meal when there was a knock on the dorm door. It was Ji Wenlin and Bai Xiaomai. Ji Wenlin looked at me with a complicated expression and cleared his throat. "Manman, I want to talk to you about something." I looked at him without saying a word. Ji Wenlin glanced at Bai Xiaomai, who stood beside him, looking cautious. His eyes were full of tenderness, but when he spoke again, his tone was firm. "Manman, Xiaomai just got back from the city. As you know, she's the only one in her family, and no one's lived in her place for a long time. It needs cleaning. Since we haven't officially registered our marriage yet, I was thinking, maybe we could let Xiaomai stay in our wedding home for a few days." I glanced at Bai Xiaomai. Bai Xiaomai looked like a startled rabbit, cowering behind Ji Wenlin. In this life and the last, I saw two completely different Bai Xiaomais. If someone told me Bai Xiaomai hadn't been reborn, I wouldn't believe it. But I didn't have time to play along with her. I don't want this man anymore. No matter how much Bai Xiaomai does, it's all pointless in my eyes. "Fine, it's your house, you call the shots." Ji Wenlin didn't expect me to agree so readily. The words he'd prepared suddenly got stuck in his throat, hanging there, unable to come out. "But I don't like people touching my things. I'll go pack up my stuff later." Ji Wenlin froze for a moment, then hurriedly said, No, I'll move your things to another room." It turned out he didn't just want Bai Xiaomai to move into our wedding suite. He also wanted her to sleep in our wedding bed. How ridiculous. I saw Bai Xiaomai smiling with a slight curve to her lips. After dinner, I took a flashlight and went to the bridal suite to pack my things. When I arrived, Ji Wenlin was busy making the bed for Bai Xiaomai, and he was using the new sheets I had carefully selected for our wedding night. Ji Wenlin looked a little surprised to see me. "Manman, why are you here? I've already put your things in my room." "Oh," I replied briefly and turned to go get my things from the next room. Ji Wenlin followed me. His expression was complex, his eyes filled with emotions I couldn't quite read. "Manman?" Just then, Bai Xiaomai ran out of the room. "Brother Wenlin, aren't you going to use that bed sheet when you and Sister Manman get married? Wouldn't it be a bit inappropriate to let me sleep on it?" "I'm fine with it. I don't mind sleeping on dirty clothes." Bai Xiaomai's voice grew softer as she spoke. I saw a look of tenderness in Ji Wenlin's eyes as he looked at her. He looked at me. "Manman, look, all the sheets at home are new. This one." How could I miss the fleeting smugness in Bai Xiaomai's eyes? But she didn't know yet that Ji Wenlin, a total jerk, wasn't someone I planned on keeping around from the moment I was reborn. I said indifferently, "This sheet was bought with your money. It's up to you." "Thank you, Manman, and Wenlin. You've been so kind to me." "Wow, I never thought that one day I'd get to stay in Wenlin's wedding suite and sleep in his wedding bed. No matter how I heard it, those words sounded off, and Ji Wenlin sensed it too, but he looked at me without saying a word, as if testing my limits. After speaking, Bai Xiaomai seemed to realize something. She covered her mouth and put on a guilty expression. I'm sorry, Sister Manman, I'm so sorry. Actually, don't get the wrong idea. There's really nothing going on between me and Brother Wenlin. I think I'll just sleep on the dirty clothes. With that, she reached into her bag to grab the dirty clothes. Ji Wenlin quickly stopped her. I reassured Bai Xiaomai, it's nothing. Go ahead and sleep soundly, it's no big deal. Ji Wenlin couldn't read anything from my face. He stood to the side, deep in thought. I was busy packing my things and didn't have time to pay him any mind. Bai Xiaomai was deliberately trying to cover up the truth, but the more she explained, the worse it looked. She was simply trying to provoke me, hoping to play up her vulnerability in front of Ji Wenlin, so that Ji Wenlin would grow to despise me. But having been given a second chance at life, why would I care? The only thing she should be grateful for is that she didn't dance in front of me in my previous life. She hasn't danced enough this time around. I leaned in close to Bai Xiaomai and whispered in her ear, Little Mai, you're overthinking it. Why would I care? Your brother Wenlin is just looking out for you. What's so hard to understand about that? I wouldn't even mind if he married you. I just don't know if he'll actually do it. I looked at Bai Xiaomai and gave her a playful wink. Upon hearing this, Bai Xiaomai's face turned grim. She couldn't figure it out. How was I any different from that dull, easily manipulated man from my past life? But soon she realized something, and when she looked at me again, her face was full of smug satisfaction. I packed up my things. I hoisted my bag and prepared to leave. Ji Wenlin suddenly called out to me from behind. He took a step forward, trying to take the bundle off my back. I refused. What a joke. Bai Xiaomai has been reborn. In her past life, she spent her entire life as the third wheel. This time around, I'm here to take her place. She's already treated that loser Ji Wenlin as her personal property. I have no intention of getting myself into trouble. Ji Wenlin saw me flinch and looked at me with hurt in his eyes. Manman, are you mad? I can explain. How strange, the person who, in my past life, would rather waste my entire existence than open her mouth. But in this life, he's actually opened his mouth. But I already know what he's going to say. It's nothing more than using the pretext of caring for me while emotionally drifting away. An explanation? Pointless. Besides, Bai Xiaomai wouldn't agree anyway. Just as I thought. Hearing Bai Xiaomai's scream, Ji Wenlin couldn't be bothered to see me off anymore. He turned on his heel and ran back into the house. I snorted derisively, tugged at the bundle on my back, and walked away. In my previous life, I was married to Ji Wenlin for 21 years, and my life ended at the age of 45. At that age, it was considered a tragic, untimely death. Back when I gave birth to that ungrateful brat, I suffered a difficult delivery and severe hemorrhaging. That's when my health began to decline. Later, before I'd fully recovered, I had to care for my son all by myself. I also had to look after Ji Wenlin's unreasonable parents. On top of that, I had to work while running around everywhere looking for Ji Wenlin. My health just kept getting worse day by day. Raising my son to the age of 20 was the result of my relentless, tireless efforts. Ever since Ji Wenlin disappeared, I haven't had a single good night's sleep. Now that I've been given a second chance at life, I didn't marry Ji Wenlin. I haven't worn myself out to the point of exhaustion. I'm in good health. I can finally sleep soundly and peacefully. A dreamless night, the first good night's sleep I've had in 2 lifetimes. The next day, I asked my boss for time off and told him I'd agreed to the transfer back to Beijing. My boss was puzzled. Didn't you say that after marrying engineer Ji you didn't want to live apart from him? I shook my head. I won't marry him. For me, my career is the most important thing right now. My boss looked at me and smiled with relief. In my previous life, my boss had also tried to persuade me. He said, with your abilities, you could achieve much more. I had lost my senses, giving up such a great opportunity for a scumbag. I asked my boss to keep my departure a secret. I also discussed the timing of my departure with him. After leaving my boss's office, I headed straight to the train station. Train tickets were hard to come by at that time of year, and I had to wait in line for a long time. As I rode past the house where we were supposed to get married, through the picket fence, I saw Ji Wenlin and Bai Xiaomai squatting together in the yard, brushing their teeth. Ji Wenlin deftly and naturally took a towel from the clothesline and personally helped Bai Xiaomai dry her hands. Bai Xiaomai looked at him with a deeply affectionate expression. It seemed that after just one night, their relationship had taken a qualitative leap forward. When they saw me cycling past the gate, Ji Wenlin's face went pale, and he hurriedly put some distance between himself and Bai Xiaomai. I looked away, completely ignoring the guilty conscience of one and the hurt look in the other's eyes. Relying on my memory, I made my way to the train station. After paying to store my bicycle, I followed the crowd into the ticket hall. At this time of year, everyone heading on a long journey was lugging bags of all sizes. From small items like needles and thread to large ones like bedding and baskets, they were taking everything they could onto the train. Looking at the crowded throng, I finally decided to pack as lightly as possible, especially when it came to bulky items. I sold whatever I could and gave away whatever I couldn't. After waiting in line for a long time, when faced with the choice between a standing ticket and a sleeper ticket, I chose the sleeper ticket. I suffered my whole life in my past life. In this one, I just want to treat myself well. By the time I left the train station, it was already afternoon. It had been a lifetime since I'd last traveled, so I had no experience and forgot to bring food while waiting in line. I'd missed lunch while buying the ticket, and by now I was starving. I asked around and found the state-run restaurant where Ji Wenlin and I had once dined in my past life. Back then, a colleague had introduced us, and we'd arranged to meet here for a blind date. Ji Wenlin was handsome, with fair skin, exactly the neat, clean-cut type I liked. He was also a skilled worker, just like me. Plus, both our families lived in Beijing. At the time, I thought it would make it convenient for our families to visit each other in the future. He was also very satisfied with my appearance. We decided to give it a try. During our courtship, he wasn't exactly wonderful to me, but he wasn't bad either. In our daily life, he took care of me in every way. At work, whenever I encountered difficulties, he would help me solve them. We didn't have many of those heart-fluttering moments of love. It was more about being compatible. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with him in peace and tranquility. I never expected him to drop a bombshell on me out of the blue. Ji Wenlin proposed to me after we'd been together for 2 months. At that moment, you could tell he was happy to have decided to marry me. But in the end, a childhood sweetheart couldn't compete with a sudden twist of fate. Bai Xiaomai's appearance made him feel that flutter in his heart again. His heart began to wander. Love strikes without warning, and he became deeply devoted. But he should never have done it. He should never have selfishly abandoned everything for love, squandering his entire life. After parking my bike, I walked into the state-run restaurant. There weren't many people around at that hour, so I spotted Ji Wenlin and Bai Xiaomai sitting in the corner right away. Bai Xiaomai was the first to see me. She stood up and waved at me warmly. "Sister Manman, are you here to eat? I'm here with Brother Wenlin, why don't you join us? Don't be shy, it's just a matter of adding a pair of chopsticks." She really lives up to her reputation as a top-tier schemer who's been stealing other people's husbands for over 20 years. With just 2 sentences, she positioned herself as the hostess. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I hope I'm not interrupting your date." I glanced at Ji Wenlin with a smile. Ji Wenlin clearly panicked. He hurriedly stood up to pull out a chair for me. Sister Manman, don't get the wrong idea. My relationship with Brother Wenlin isn't what you think. He just thinks I'm too skinny and wants to help me gain some weight." "Oh, great, she's showing off again." I ignored Ji Wenlin's efforts and walked over to sit next to Bai Xiaomai. Ji Wenlin rubbed his nose and sat down awkwardly. Seeing the table laden with sumptuous dishes, I was stunned. Wow, this meal must have cost Ji Wenlin at least half a month's salary. He's really generous with Bai Xiaomai. Bai Xiaomai served me a piece of braised pork. "Sister Manman, try this braised pork. Brother Wenlin said this is the best braised pork around, so he insisted on ordering some for me. He even said he'd pack me a takeout portion when we leave. Here, try this. And the fish, you have to try the fish too. I've never had fish this delicious before. Brother Wenlin said he can cook it too, and once we get back, he'll make it for me all the time." Ji Wenlin can cook? Back in my previous life, when I was pregnant, he was a complete disaster in the kitchen, always knocking over pots or smashing bowls. In the end, I had to kick him out of the kitchen and cook myself. So love can be faked after all. I took a bite of the braised pork and savored it. It really was delicious. Food back then was all genuine and hearty. This pork is truly fragrant. And this river fish, not a trace of that later-day motor oil taste. It was truly fresh and tender. I savored every bite, completely oblivious to what Bai Xiaomai was saying. Bai Xiaomai suddenly let out a shriek, startling me so much I nearly dropped my chopsticks. Sorry, Manman, I just got startled by a fishbone. Where was I just now? Oh right, Sister Manman, have you ever tried Brother Wenlin's cooking? If you haven't, you can come over tonight. Brother Wenlin promised to cook for me. Right, Brother Wenlin? Hey, startled by a fishbone? That really startled me. Bai Xiaomai clearly couldn't stand seeing me act so unconcerned. She went out of her way to act startled by the fishbone just to remind me. Go ahead and show off. Just wait until I'm gone, let's see who you'll be showing off to then. Little Mai, you're so lucky. I've known your brother Wenlin for so long, and I never knew he could cook. You've only known each other for 2 days, and he's already agreed to cook for you. Thanks to you, I'm in for a treat tonight. She was clearly trying to make me jealous enough to go crazy, but surprisingly, I couldn't care less. Bai Xiaomai was stunned. Ji Wenlin's face kept alternating between pale and red throughout the whole thing. I kept eating, completely unfazed by their reactions. When my scallion-topped tofu arrived, I pushed it toward Bai Xiaomai and Ji Wenlin and invited them to join me. The rest of the meal was much quieter. I could finally eat in peace. As I left the state-run restaurant, I said goodbye to Bai Xiaomai and Ji Wenlin and rode off on my bike. I was going to the post office to call my parents. After Ji Wenlin disappeared in my previous life, I was left alone to raise our child, care for Ji Wenlin's parents, and hold down a job. Every day, I was as busy as a bee. For some reason, even though my family background was in no way inferior to theirs, Gu's parents simply looked down on me. Not only did they refuse to help me look after the child, but they also found every possible way to torment me. The moment I did the slightest thing to displease them, they'd show up at my workplace and cause a scene. Back then, it wasn't easy to hold down a steady job, especially since I had to support my son, so I put up with it. When my parents heard about my situation, they not only helped take care of my children but also supported me in many ways. They thought about finding someone else to marry me off to, but when Mr. and Mrs. Jiu found out, they went to my parents' house and caused a huge scene. They claimed our family was trying to drive them, 2 old people, to their graves. Not only that, but whenever a man was willing to meet with me, Mrs. Jiu would follow behind with my son. Then she'd have him run up to me and throw a tantrum. Gradually, no one was willing to go on dates with me anymore, so I gave up on the idea of remarrying and devoted myself entirely to raising my son. During this time, my parents suffered no end of hardship because of Mr. and Mrs. Jiu, but more than anything, they worried about me. Until the day they passed away, I was the one they worried about the most. The call connected quickly. Hearing my parents' voices again after what felt like a lifetime, I burst into tears. They could hear the choking in my voice. My parents were very worried. They thought Ji Wenlin was bullying me. They were so angry they wanted to come over and confront Ji Wenlin. I calmed them down and told them everything that had happened recently, as well as my decision. My parents were silent for a long time on the phone. Finally, they simply said that if this was the result of my careful consideration, they would respect my decision. Only then did I breathe a sigh of relief. I told them about my decision to transfer back to Beijing. My train ticket was for 3 days later. My parents said they would definitely cook lots and lots of my favorite foods and wait for me at home. Back at the dorm, I opened the door. I found Ji Wenlin sitting at my desk, flipping through some study materials. I almost forgot, he has a spare key to my dorm room. Seeing that the drawer containing the transfer report was locked, I breathed a sigh of relief. My relationship with Ji Wenlin is still unclear, and I didn't want any unexpected incidents to happen before I left. When Ji Wenlin saw me come back, he hurriedly stood up to pour me a glass of water. He had something to say, but he kept hesitating and couldn't bring himself to speak. I sat on the bed, sipping my tea slowly, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he couldn't hold back any longer. He turned to face me. Manman, Xiaomai, and I aren't what you think. I swallowed the tea in my mouth and said calmly, what do I think? Ji Wenlin choked on his words. If I was still Hu Man from my past life, I would have believed him regardless of whether he explained himself or not. But I'm someone who's lived a whole lifetime, someone who's seen and experienced my own tragic life. Even if Ji Wenlin explained it 1,000 times over, to me, it would all be nonsense. Before I died in my previous life, he had told me this at my bedside. He'd fallen in love with Bai Xiaomai at first sight. It was true love. It wasn't comparable to the feelings he had for me. I was more like a third wheel in his relationship with Bai Xiaomai, a flaw, a thorn in the side. Manman, whether you believe it or not, I just felt that since Bai Xiaomai's parents had both passed away, it must be hard for her as an orphan, so I wanted to look out for her a little more. Ji Wenlin's eyes darted around as he explained this to me. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. How could I possibly believe him? But I said it anyway. Fine, I believe you. Can you leave now? I've had a long day and want to rest. Oh, right, please leave me the key to my dorm room. Ji Wenlin's face froze instantly. Clearly, he could tell I didn't trust him. After Ji Wenlin left, I wiped down the chair he had been sitting in. It was dirty, really dirty. I started packing up my things. Having worked here for the past 6 months, I didn't have much. Just some clothes, bedding, and daily necessities. What really needed to be settled were the wedding items I'd bought with Ji Wenlin. It looks like I'll have to find some time to settle up with Ji Wenlin before I leave. Just then, there was a knock at the door. It was Ji Wenlin. He was holding a pastry box. He happily handed it to me. Here, Manman, open it and take a look. I took the pastry box and opened it. Inside were money and tickets. Ji Wenlin said with a smile, I've had this all along. After we get married, you'll be in charge of my money. You just need to give me my monthly allowance on time. Looking at Ji Wenlin standing before me, I suddenly felt a sense of strangeness. In my past life, let alone handing over my salary, after we got married, I never even saw a single penny from him. When I hemorrhaged during childbirth, his parents didn't contribute a single penny. Instead, they shouted, let her die, it's a waste of money to keep her alive. It was my parents and my older brother and sister-in-law who paid the doctors to save me. That's the only reason I'm still alive. After that, I paid for his parents' medical bills and funeral expenses. During the 20 years Ji Wenlin was missing, he secretly kept in touch with his son. I imagine he was in touch with his parents as well. I don't know if he gave them any money. All I know is that before Mrs. Ji passed away, she called my son into her room. When my son came out, although he tried his best to look sad, I still saw a glimmer of secret joy in his eyes. After the funeral, I searched her room but found nothing of value. Later, I fell ill. With no money for treatment, I could only drag it out. I dragged it out until I was on my deathbed. Thinking back to my previous life, Ji Wenlin probably knew I was sick and needed money. The thought that my son might be hiding the money his grandmother gave him, yet neither of them was willing to use it to treat my illness. I felt a dull ache in my heart. Ji Wenlin saw me suddenly start trembling all over. He rushed forward, anxious to support me, but I pushed him away. I leaned against the wall and took a long while to recover. When I looked at Ji Wenlin again, my eyes held nothing but coldness. Ji Wenlin's heart skipped a beat. I looked at the money in the metal box. Since Ji Wenlin had brought the money, there was no way I was going to come out short. The debts from my past life can never be settled. But in this life, I intend to settle them. I took out half of the money meant for wedding expenses from the box. I handed the remaining money and the box to Ji Wenlin. Ji Wenlin looked puzzled at my actions, but he didn't ask any questions. Even the most oblivious person could sense the change in me. He didn't understand what had happened in those few short minutes. He just felt that something seemed to be spiraling out of control. After making sure I was okay, he walked away, glancing back every few steps. That night, I slept very restlessly. The past life I had seen. Mr. and Mrs. Ji told Ji Wenlin about my difficult labor and severe bleeding. Ji Wenlin merely gave a faint hum over the phone. I also saw that when my son was still in swaddling clothes, Mr. and Mrs. Ji kept it from me and secretly took him to meet Ji Wenlin. Ji Wenlin knew I had been searching for him all along, yet he conspired with everyone to keep it from me. No wonder everyone who knew him refused to say a word to me. I also dreamed of a colleague I'd worked with for many years in my past life. They spoke highly of Ji Wenlin and Bai Xiaomai's love. As for me, his wife, I was nothing more than a red thread that the matchmaker had accidentally tied in the wrong place while drunk, in their eyes. Ha! How ridiculous. I woke up, my pillow soaked with tears. But I'm still alive, healthy, and alive. There are still opportunities in life, aren't there? For the next 2 days, I was busy with the handover of my work. I made plans with Bai Xiaomai to go eat the food Jiu Wenlin had cooked, and because of that night, the money box was quietly put to rest. I thought that was the end of it, but that evening, Bai Xiaomai showed up. She invited me over for dinner. I couldn't refuse such a kind invitation, so I accepted. When dinner time came, I showed up with a gift in hand. Through the garden fence, I saw Bai Xiaomai and Jiu Wenlin embracing each other. Jiu Wenlin's hand was resting on Bai Xiaomai's most delicate spot, gently caressing it. When he saw me, his face turned paler than I'd ever seen it. Bai Xiaomai also looked completely terrified. She hurriedly tried to fasten the buttons that were almost completely undone. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked away. I'll accept the fancy dinner Bai Xiaomai treated me to tonight, but there's no need for a gift. Not long after I left, Jiu Wenlin came running after me. He grabbed my arm and frantically tried to explain. "Manman, let me explain. Xiaomai and I aren't what you saw." "What exactly? Was it the two of you hugging each other with your clothes askew? Or was it your hand in a place it shouldn't be?" These past few days, even though I've been busy with the job handover, I've heard plenty of Aunt Wang's nagging. Aunt Wang couldn't stand mistresses, especially someone like Bai Xiaomai. Not only does she know she's the other woman and act like one, but she also keeps running back and forth in front of the wife. She's always reporting the latest disgusting details about Jiu Wenlin and Bai Xiaomai. She said, someone in the village saw Bai Xiaomai deliberately rubbing up against Jiu Wenlin, and he didn't even try to avoid her. Some people saw Bai Xiaomai and Jiu Wenlin eating from the same bowl. Someone saw Bai Xiaomai and Jiu Wenlin holding hands in a secluded spot. At that moment, Jiu Wenlin, sitting in front of me, looked a bit flustered. I couldn't understand why, after doing all that with Bai Xiaomai, yet he still came to me, asking me not to misunderstand. Does he still want me to take care of his parents at home, just like in our past life? Are he and Bai Xiaomai all lovey-dovey out there? Before Bai Xiaomai showed up, I was the only one who could get close to you. Bai Xiaomai had only been there for an hour, and you were already carrying her to the hospital. You'd known her less than 3 hours, and you let her sit on your bike with her arms around your waist. After knowing her for less than 5 hours, you left me behind and took her to eat at the cafeteria. After knowing her for less than 7 hours, you let her stay in our wedding suite, sleep in our wedding bed, and use the bedding and sheets I prepared for our marriage. You've only known her for a day, yet you're willing to spend half a month's salary on a fancy dinner for her. It's also been only a day since you met her, yet you're willing to cook soup for her with your own hands. You don't shy away from her touch. You share a bowl of rice with her and hold her hand. Now you're hugging him and caressing her. And yet you still have the nerve to swear to me that there's nothing going on between you two? Do you really think I'd believe that? Perhaps because my words grew more explosive with each sentence, Jiu Wenlin's body began to tremble uncontrollably. He pressed his lips together, but couldn't bring himself to say a word. Let me guess. You're afraid I'll misunderstand, so you feel compelled to explain yourself, even going so far as to throw money at me, just to make me believe you. On the day we were supposed to get our marriage certificate, you fell for Bai Xiaomai at first sight. Bai Xiaomai had feelings for you too, so she pretended to be injured to stop us from getting married. And at that time, because you'd fallen for Bai Xiaomai, you actually didn't want to go through with the marriage registration with me. But over the past few days, you've probably come to your senses. You love Bai Xiaomai and want to spend romantic evenings with her. I looked into Jiu Wenlin's eyes and said, word by word, but at the same time, you need a supportive partner to help you take care of your parents. And if that partner could help you care for your parents in their old age and see them through to the end, that would be even better. Am I right? When I finished, Jiu Wenlin suddenly looked up at me, his eyes filled with disbelief. Seeing his shocked expression, I actually felt a pang of sadness. Sad that a man so full of scheming had wasted his entire life. I felt sad that what I had once thought was a little bit of sweetness after marriage was nothing but a joke. I can no longer deceive myself. Likewise, I would not allow Jiu Wenlin to continue deceiving me. That evening, I returned to the dormitory to pack the luggage I would take with me when I left. But just then, Bai Xiaomai showed up. She glared at me with a vicious look on her face. "Hu man, you're back too, aren't you?" Seeing my calm expression, she snorted derisively. When she looked at me again, her eyes were filled with contempt and mockery. So what if you took Brother Wenlin's wife's place in your past life? You still ended up being a housekeeper for his parents your whole life. The son he worked so hard to raise was calling me mom behind your back, pa. Isn't that just hilarious? Your husband is mine, and so is your son. And in this life, even though you've been reborn too, you can't change the fact that Brother Wenlin loves me. In this life, Brother Wenlin's wife will be me, and only me. Although I was utterly disillusioned with my son from my past life, hearing that he called by Xiao Mai, mom, behind my back still made my heart ache. Thank goodness that in this life, whether he allows it or not, I will never bring him into this world. Bai Xiao Mai, like a cocky rooster, chatted on and on in front of me, but when she saw the pity, sympathy, and compassion in my eyes, and not a trace of anger, she fled in panic. To me, she was nothing more than a pitiful soul, just like myself. In this life, without me there to cover for her and Ji Wenlin, will they still be able to live a happy life like they did in the last one? At 10 past midnight, unable to sleep, I stepped out of the dorm to look at the moon, but I was startled by a dark figure sitting by the door. By the light spilling from inside, I could make out that it was Ji Wenlin. He reeked of alcohol. I didn't know how long he'd been sitting there. I realized that even after being reborn, I still couldn't figure him out. I grabbed my flashlight and went to find Bai Xiao Mai. When Bai Xiao Mai heard I'd come to ask her to take Ji Wenlin home, she visibly froze for a moment, but she didn't say a word and followed me back to the dorm. Ji Wenlin was asleep, and Bai Xiao Mai struggled to drag her away. I didn't help. Let her deal with the consequences of the man she fell in love with. The next day, as I was packing my bags to leave, Aunt Wang came looking for me. She dragged me along to watch the show. I followed her all the way to the apartment that had once been Ji Wenlin and my wedding home. I saw Ji Wenlin looking furious as he stared at Bai Xiao Mai, who was sitting on the floor, disheveled. It turned out that after Bai Xiao Mai had taken Ji Wenlin home last night, she recalled how Ji Wenlin had chased after me, and how dejected he looked when he returned, and the way he'd passed out drunk in front of my dorm room. He had even been calling out my name in his sleep. She couldn't sit still any longer. Taking advantage of Ji Wenlin's drunkenness, even though he mistook her for me, she still slept with him. After hearing roughly what had happened from the villagers, I felt nothing but disgust. I grabbed my luggage and turned to leave, but Ji Wenlin grabbed me by the arm. "Man, let me explain. Is this scumbag never going to let it go?" I took a deep breath and looked at him with a completely impassive expression. "Ji Wenlin, I thought I made myself perfectly clear yesterday." Ji Wenlin wanted to see, through my eyes, that I still harbored even a shred of affection for him. But he was in for a disappointment. In my eyes, there was only the indifference I'd show a stranger. Because I don't care, I'm not angry. Because I wasn't angry, I didn't care. He finally realized that I truly didn't care about him anymore. Ji Wenlin let go of my hand, his grip weakening. His voice was muffled as he whispered from behind me, "I'm sorry." What exactly is he apologizing for? For this life, or for a past one? I left Yuanshan village. I returned to Beijing. Seeing my parents healthy and happy again, I broke down in tears. Every day since my rebirth, though I appeared carefree on the surface, a heavy burden weighed on my heart. That was my entire life. A life so heavy it felt suffocating. How could I possibly let it go so easily? Ji Wenlin and Bai Xiao Mai deserve to be torn to pieces 1,000 times over. But I have my parents, my brother, and my sister-in-law. I can't let two scoundrels ruin the fresh start I've been given. It wasn't until this very moment, seeing my parents, still healthy and unburdened by me, only then did I feel the weight lift off my shoulders. I spent a few days with my parents, enjoying the warmth of their love and my devotion to them. I threw myself back into my work. Free from the burdens of my son and the Jiu family, I performed exceptionally well at work. It wasn't long before I received a promotion and a raise. I was also hired as a professor at a university, finally fulfilling my long-held dream of becoming a teacher. It wasn't until a year later that I heard news of Ji Wenlin again. Bai Xiao Mai ultimately fulfilled her wish from her previous life. She married Ji Wenlin and became his legitimate wife. Shortly after the wedding, Ji Wenlin took her back to Beijing. Ji Wenlin's parents were no pushovers. In my previous life, even though I came from a good family and had a good job, they still looked down on me. They looked down on Bai Xiao Mai, who didn't have a job, even more, so they pulled out all the stops to torment Bai Xiaomai. The Jiyu household was in constant upheaval. Jiyu Wenlin wanted to take Bai Xiaomai away, but Gu's parents refused, throwing a fit and threatening to kill themselves. They believed that since Bai Xiaomai was unemployed, marrying their son was a step up for her. The very thought that Bai Xiaomai had ruined things between me and their son, they seethed with hatred. No matter what, they refused to let Jiyu Wenlin take Bai Xiaomai away. They just wanted to keep Bai Xiaomai close by, to work herself to the bone serving them. A childhood sweetheart is no match for a match made in heaven. Romance under the moon and flowers is no match for the daily grind of life. After a long time, when Jiyu Wenlin looked at Bai Xiaomai again, she seemed nothing special. Without Jiyu Wenlin's love, Bai Xiaomai was no different from any common shrew. Before long, Jiyu Wenlin applied for a transfer. This time, he didn't take Bai Xiaomai with him. Later, it was said that Bai Xiaomai fought back. She and Gu's parents tormented one another, and all of them lived miserable lives. Later still, it was said that Jiyu Wenlin had cheated on her. In a fit of rage, Bai Xiaomai went to his workplace and filed a complaint against Jiyu Wenlin. She accused Jiyu Wenlin of sexually assaulting her while he was drunk during their time in Yuanshan village. That was something I hadn't expected. Sure enough, anyone who can spend their whole life as the third wheel to a scumbag isn't exactly a saint. What surprised me was Jiyu Wenlin. In his past life, he had resented me because of a single regretful remark from Bai Xiaomai, the man who was heartbroken beyond words as he gazed at Bai Xiaomai's portrait. And when he saw me leave, he was filled with pain and remorse. Even in this life, I couldn't see how deeply devoted he was to Bai Xiaomai. I really did overestimate him. A man rotten to the core, whose very nature is self-love, how could he possibly be truly remorseful? It was nothing more than resentment over what he'd lost and what he'd failed to achieve. Fortunately, in this life, I've escaped that prison. My future is bright and full of promise. That wraps up the first story. Don't go anywhere. Let's dive into the second one now. When I was 18, I was the top student in the entire school, but my parents forced me to give up the college entrance exam and sold me to an old man in the village to be his plaything. In the end, I died in childbirth on a filthy, stinking bed. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day my parents forced me to give up the college entrance exam. Faced with my father's cold-blooded coercion and my mother's hypocritical, well-meaning pleas, I smiled sweetly and nodded obediently. Okay, I'll do whatever you say. For 20,000 yuan, my parents personally handed me over to that old man's bed. The old man had never seen a woman in his life. His eyes lit up the moment he saw me. I knelt down and begged him, "Uncle, please let me go. I have 3 months left before my college entrance exams. I'll definitely pay you back the 20,000 yuan. The old man had no intention of listening to me. His hoarse voice trembled with excitement. Have a baby. Have a baby. I cried until my eyes were dry. The slightest movement of my eyelids felt like needles piercing them. Fearing I might run away, the old man tied me to the bed with a dog leash. When I felt sad, I would silently recite ancient poetry, memorize math formulas, and frantically read aloud the English words I knew by heart. Gradually, my memories grew hazy, completely submerged in this filthy, stinking thatched cottage. The room was rarely ventilated, and the stench of rotten blood assaulted my nostrils. I vomited violently, yet my belly grew larger day by day. On the day I gave birth, I was so emaciated that my face was pale, and I couldn't even clench my fist. Help me! A searing pain filled every fiber of my being. I cried out and gradually lost consciousness. I never woke up again. The villagers knew about this and would occasionally sigh. Old Lee really had it rough. He finally saved up enough to marry a wife, only to die in childbirth. He got nothing out of it. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in 2010, where the nightmare had begun. My dad blew a smoke ring and settled the matter with a single sentence. The Lee family's men are coming to see you tomorrow. Look your best and don't cause any trouble. I clutched the hem of my shirt and kept my head down, saying nothing. My mom sighed. Nian Di, try to be understanding. Your cousin is old enough to get married now, and we need to build a wedding house. My parents were from the countryside. Having no sons of their own, they treated my cousin as their own child, even dividing their land and giving him their share. Now that my cousin had reached marriageable age, my parents were discussing how to raise money for him to build a house. In my past life, Hearing those words sent me into a complete breakdown, and I threw a wild tantrum. My father flew into a rage, and the lashes of the whip rained down on me one after another. He also locked me tightly in my room to prevent me from running away. This time, I blinked and said plaintively, "Mom and Dad, I'm your biological daughter." My father replied coldly, "You're 18 already, and you still don't understand? Your cousin bears the responsibility of carrying on the Zhong family line. He is the very root of our Zhong family." I shuddered and whimpered softly, but I heard Li Jun is a 50-something-year-old bachelor. "Mom and Dad, I'm scared." My mom, unusually moved, said, "Don't worry. It's just in the next village. I'll come visit you then." Will she come visit me? But in my past life, whenever you happened to hear news about me, you'd pinch your nose in disgust and call me filthy. I lowered my eyes and nodded obediently. "Mom, if I'm ever treated unfairly, you have to come see me, okay?" Of course. This time, not only did my parents not lock me up, they even prepared a huge spread of food for me. Of course, this wasn't out of concern or a desire to make things right, it was because Li Jun was coming over tomorrow. They wanted me to put on some weight. The next day, Li Jun and the matchmaker came to our house. My mom looked at this short man with a wrinkled face and yellow rubber shoes on his feet, and warmly invited him inside. The family clearly took this meeting very seriously and had invited quite a few relatives to support the occasion. My cousin, however, was nowhere to be seen. Just like in my past life, Li Jun, who had never touched a woman in his entire life, stared at me with wide, fixed eyes the moment he saw me. His lecherous gaze was glued to my chest, and as he spoke, the black mole at the corner of his mouth twitched. "Great, I'll take this one, she's sure to bear a son." Everyone at the table burst into knowing laughter. My face flushed crimson, and with the unique bashfulness of an inexperienced young girl, I wished I could sink into the ground. Li Jun grinned, revealing a row of yellow teeth, and his rough, calloused hand roughly kneaded the palm of my hand. "Can you bear a son?" Startled, I flinched and shrank back. After a long moment, I whispered, "I can." He wouldn't let it go. "How many?" Everyone at the table watched with great interest. I obediently held up my fingers. 3. My parents exchanged a glance, surprised at how smoothly things had gone. They couldn't stop smiling, utterly satisfied. Halfway through the meal, I scanned the room, set down my chopsticks and bowl, and asked in confusion, "Auntie, where's my cousin?" My aunt replied casually, "He's still sleeping." Where else would he be? Li Jun really liked me and was always looking for a way to get closer to me. Noticing my reaction, he asked with interest, "You have a cousin?" I nodded obediently. "Yes. Our family has always treated my cousin as my own brother. We're even planning to use my dowry to build a wedding home for him. Today is the first time we've met. It's such an important day, even Grandpa came, but a younger relative didn't show up." Li Jun's face darkened slightly as he asked my aunt, "Are you looking down on me?" My aunt looked sheepish as she set down her chopsticks and bowl. No, it's just that her brother is so inconsiderate. I'll go get him right now. My cousin's house is very close to mine, just a wall away." I chewed slowly on the meat Li Jun had served me. 47 seconds later, a woman's panicked scream pierced the air. A swarm of relatives from the family rushed over to see what was happening. 2 naked men were running around frantically, clutching their heads. One of them was my cousin. My aunt, in a state of utter panic, chased after them with a broom. My father was stunned, slapping his thigh in disbelief. "Yao Zhu, how can you face the ancestors of the Zhong family?" With so many people watching, my cousin decided to stop pretending. "I just like men. I only want men for the rest of my life." The crowd gasped, and the scene instantly erupted into chaos. Amid the chaos, I quietly took Li Jun's hand and slipped away. We stopped in front of the quiet bamboo grove. Blushing, I stared at him with my clear, bright eyes and asked, "Jun, will we be able to see each other tomorrow?" Li Jun grinned, revealing his yellow teeth, and looked at me with a dazed expression. "Of course we can." My parents were so angry they fell ill. The belief they'd held for over 20 years, that they must carry on the family line, collapsed in an instant. Both of them collapsed into bed, their moans of pain growing more desperate with every passing moment. I hesitated for a moment, then lay back down on the bed. I had to get plenty of rest so I could be in top form for my date with Lee Jun tomorrow. Lee Jun took this much more seriously than I did. He'd even put on a suit especially for this date. At 5 feet 3 inches, the sleeves and pant legs were much too baggy, making him look a bit comical. This man in his 50s seemed to have just discovered love for the first time, peeking around like a young lad, eagerly awaiting my arrival. The moment he saw me, he broke into a silly, dreamy grin. I walked over and naturally took his hand. "Brother Jun, let's go. My cousin and I have never gotten along, and since something happened at her house yesterday, she was waiting for me right at the entrance." Seeing me walking intimately with Lee Jun, she sneered, "Jong ni auntie, I never would have thought you'd willingly marry this old man. He must reek of old age by now." Lee Jun frowned in displeasure, but I simply linked my arm through his with confidence. "Brother Jun is great." My cousin curled her lips in a sneer. "Tang Shu must be blind to have fallen for a woman as vain as you. All for 20,000 yuan, how shameful." Tang Shu? My heart gave a sudden jolt. Tang Shu was a star student at Anshui High School. His grades consistently ranked in the top 3 in the school, and he came from a wealthy family. Faint memories came flooding back. That bright, cheerful boy who used to make me laugh, saying to me, half in jest, half in earnest, "Nian Di, which college do you want to apply to? Let's go together." I knew full well that I would never cross paths with someone like him again, but I never expected to run into him again under these circumstances. What could I possibly do with a man in his 50s from the countryside? Go to the movies? That's a waste of money. He doesn't know how to manage his finances. Lee Jun, his face shiny with oil, dragged me around the town market. Several vendors selling farm tools leaned over, sizing me up from head to toe as I obediently trailed behind him. "Junzi, is this your woman?" At that moment, Lee Jun would slow to a stop, looking extremely smug. "I paid 20,000 for her, mainly so she can bear a son." Eventually, we sat down at a noodle stall set up under a tent. Lee Jun slurped up the noodles in big mouthfuls, chewing noisily with a smear of grease all over his face. "Nian Di?" Amid the clamor of the noodle stall, the boy's clear voice carried an uncontrollable joy. I held my chopsticks and slowly turned my head. A gentle breeze ruffled the hem of the boy's shirt. Tang Shuqing's tall, slender figure stood before me. He smiled at me, standing perfectly straight. "Did you come out with your uncle?" He noticed Lee Jun sitting across from me. Lee Jun was staring intently at me. I stood up, annoyed. "What's with that look? Can't you see how well we go together? He's my husband." Tang Shu's smile froze on his face, and he stammered, "Nian Di, that joke isn't funny at all. Aren't you taking the college entrance exam anymore?" I shrugged indifferently. "The college entrance exam is nothing compared to getting married. If I marry Jun, I'll get 20,000 yuan, how great is that?" Tang Shu found it utterly absurd. "With your current grades, getting into a top-tier university is absolutely no problem. Once you do, your life will be 1,000,000 times better than getting married." "Who's that brat?" Lee Jun pulled me warily behind him and eyed Tang Shu with hostility. "Get lost." My snow-white arm gently wrapped around Lee Jun's back to soothe him, and I shot Tang Shu a contemptuous look. "Jun, he's just a bookworm. He doesn't know shit." Tang Shu couldn't fathom why I, who had always been so hardworking and ambitious, had turned into this. He was furious at my lack of ambition, his voice brimming with disappointment. "Marrying an old man for 20,000 yuan? How have you become so vain?" I rolled my eyes. "None of your damn business." Tang Shu tried to say something else, but I was fed up. I grabbed Lee Jun's arm and dragged him past him. On the way, Lee Jun's face darkened. He raised his hand and slapped me across the face. "You slut, do you think I'm too old? Are you planning to run off with this pretty boy later, or are you just faking it all along, planning to dump me once you and this pretty boy get into college?" As Lee Jun spoke, he grew increasingly convinced he was right. His rough hand clamped down on mine, half dragging, half pulling me back. "Come home with me right now. I'll tie you up with a dog chain and see where you run off to then." A stinging pain shot through my cheek, and my eyes welled up with tears. "Brother Jun, what are you thinking? If I didn't like you, I wouldn't have gone on a date with you in the first place." Li Jun snorted skeptically. He actually tried to make you run away just now. You're my woman. From now on, you're going to stay put and give me a son. You're not allowed to see people like that again. I nodded obediently, stood on tiptoe, and planted a soft, delicate kiss on his cheek. Jun, don't worry. I'll definitely give you a son. Li Jun seemed pleased. His cloudy eyes studied me with an ambiguous expression. That pretty boy insulted you, aren't you angry? In my past life, Li Jun and I had no emotional connection. I remember that clearly. Li Jun's wrist flickered, and the bamboo whip in his hand whistled through the air. Stroke after stroke, it landed on my body without mercy. For half his life, he had been destitute and reclusive, never having received a glance from the opposite sex. When his skin had grown dry and saggy, he finally spent 20,000 to buy a woman of his own. His body, which had withered for half a lifetime, suddenly swelled with power, and behind closed doors, he played the role of a monarch. I gently wiped the grease off Li Jun's clothes with a tissue, my eyes glistening with tears as I looked at him. Jun, I don't care what others think. Ever since I was little, just because I'm a girl, my parents have always favored my cousin and only ever hit and scolded me. You're the first person who's ever treated me with genuine kindness, not only taking me out shopping, but also treating me to noodles. I'm truly so happy. I don't have any other plans for the future. I just want to live a good life with you. Li Jun was visibly moved. His rough hands clasped my waist as he promised me with emotion, be my woman. You won't have to go back to your parents' house anymore. I'll take care of you. See, men need to be coaxed. To make things easier for us in the future, I went out on dates with him every day for the next few days. I tried every trick in the book to please him, working hard to adapt to the role of a docile, honest, and charming wife. It's a 3-hour drive from the village to town, so to keep up my act, I stayed near the town for a few days. My skin was dewy and supple, and my eyes, glistening with moisture, were filled with nothing but him. Li Jun was becoming more and more infatuated with me. I breathed a sigh of relief and returned home with peace of mind. But as soon as I neared the front door, I couldn't help but furrow my brow and cover my nose. The scene before me was even more shocking. That strange, foul stench was coming from my parents. They were lying weakly in front of my cousin's door. Soon, my cousin came out of the house carrying a bucket of cold water. He splashed it all over them and snapped impatiently, "If you're going to die, go back to your own shabby house, don't die here." My parents shivered violently from the cold. My father propped himself up with mud-covered hands and pleaded hoarsely, "Yaozu, please give us something to eat. We haven't had a bite in 2 days." What on earth was going on? I rushed over to help them back home, my voice trembling. "Mom and Dad, I was only gone with Jun for a few days." "How did you end up in such a state?" There was no rice left in the house, and the damp room was littered with my parents' sick vomit. I borrowed some rice from our neighbor, Aunt Lee, cooked some meat porridge, and went to the village doctor to get some medicine. Aunt Lee's family was relatively well off, and her 2 daughters were doing very well. The older one had graduated from college and was working in the city, while the younger one was still in high school, in the same honors class as me. As I was leaving, Aunt Lee took my hand and said, "What a tragedy. With your grades, if you get into a top-tier school and collect the scholarship money the town allocates, it would be 1,000 times better than marrying that old bachelor." My dad shoveled porridge into his mouth frantically, his eyes bulging with fury. "That son of a bitch Zhong Yaozu, we wasted all that money on him, and we didn't even get a bowl of porridge in return." I lowered my gaze and raised my hand to wipe the tears from my reddened eyes. "Mom and Dad, it's my fault. If I hadn't been afraid Li Jun would change his mind, I wouldn't have thought of going out with him these past few days. Don't worry, Li Jun has promised to bring 20,000 yuan to marry me in a few days. Once my cousin receives that money, he'll surely understand your feelings. After I leave with Li Jun, he'll definitely take good care of you both." Under the dim, yellow light, my father hunched his back. Perhaps thinking of my cousin's actions over the past few days, his gaunt, sallow face took on a rare look of desolation. "I know you've always been sensible and well-behaved. Why did you have to be a daughter? If you'd been a son, I wouldn't have given all the farmland to my eldest brother's family back then. After eating and drinking her fill, my mother's dazed expression gradually cleared, and she shrieked, "That ungrateful wretch Zhong Yaozu. He has the means but chooses to go the hard way. It's a shame we didn't ask for a single acre of land back, we gave it all to him. Now I think it would be better if you found a husband for her to marry into the family. If she bears a son, he'll take the Zhong surname, and that would at least ensure the Zhong family line continues." My father narrowed his eyes as he looked me up and down, nodding thoughtfully. "I, old Zhong, have had a hard life. I have only one biological daughter. This is for the best." "No, you should have 4 daughters." When my mom was giving birth to her second child, my dad boiled a pot of water. I thought it was to wash Mom's body. The baby's loud wail echoed through the entire thatched cottage. I, a 2-year-old, hopped over excitedly to find my dad. "Daddy, Mommy gave birth." My dad hurried over, picked up the baby, and examined it closely. He cursed, "Bad luck," then cradled the newborn over the steaming water, held it high, and tossed it in with disgust. Later, my mother gave birth to 2 daughters, both of whom mysteriously vanished. I bit my lip, looking at our bare-wall thatched cottage, and hesitated. "Mom and Dad, I'll do whatever you say. But we don't even have any farmland. What man would want to marry into our family and let his son take my surname?" My parents exchanged a glance and frowned deeply. I lowered my gaze to the faded cuffs of my pants, pondering the best moment to place my report card on the dining table. My mom seemed to think of something. Her eyes suddenly lit up, and she slapped her thigh. "Nian Nian, I heard from Aunt Lee that anyone in our town who gets into a top-tier university can get a bonus of over 20,000 yuan. Aunt Lee said you're always at the top of your class. So why don't you take the college entrance exam too? Bring home that 20-something thousand, and finding a son-in-law to marry into the family will be a piece of cake." To confirm this idea, early the next morning, my mom dragged me over to Aunt Lee's house. She asked about the relevant policies in detail. Realizing why my mom was there, Aunt Lee's tense expression gave way to one of astonishment. "That's right. Since so few students in our town get into top-tier universities these days, the higher-ups decided to offer a 100,000 yuan reward to encourage local students." My mom clapped her hands and beamed. 100,000? That's wonderful, just wonderful. Aunt Lee gave me a gentle look and continued, "Your daughter Nian Di is a real scholar. My daughter Nana told me that Nian Di always comes in first in the whole school. As long as she keeps up this momentum, she has a very good chance of getting into a top-tier university." My mom usually felt overshadowed by Aunt Lee in every way. Hearing Aunt Lee's praise for me now, she was overjoyed, but still blurted out instinctively, "It's a shame Nian Di is a girl. If she were a boy, she'd bring honor to the Zhong family." Aunt Lee frowned, shot my mom a glance, and said displeasedly, "What's wrong with being a daughter? Aren't you a woman yourself?" My mom gave an awkward laugh. "I was just speaking off the cuff." After leaving Aunt Lee's house, my mom spat out in disdain, "What's she so proud of? She's just as childless as the rest of us. Don't be fooled by her eldest daughter working in the big city, she's 24 and still unmarried. I bet she's so overeducated that no man wants her." As she spoke, my mom gave me a solemn warning, "Come back as soon as you get the money. Don't go following in her eldest daughter's footsteps. A woman who ends up like that will never be able to hold her head up for the rest of her life." I nodded, a demure smile curving my lips. "I know, Mom." Back home, I dug out the workbook that had been gathering dust in the corner and carefully brushed the dust off its cover. I couldn't help but feel a lump in my throat. Just then, a commotion erupted outside. I looked out the window. "Nian Di, I'm here to take you home to have a son." Li Jun's thinning hair was slicked back with hair gel, gleaming with grease. Clutching 20,000 yuan in cash, he was rushing to burst into my room. I slowly walked to the window and watched the commotion outside. Seeing that thick stack of bright red bills, my parents' eyes lit up, and they stood there stunned for a moment. My mom acted quickly and stopped Li Jun. "Nian Di is my precious daughter, how can you just take her away like that?" My dad snapped out of it and cleared his throat. "Nian Di is only 18 this year, she won't turn 19 for another 3 months. Her mother and I have discussed it. We'll let her get married once she turns 19. Lee Jun was furious and shouted loudly, in 3 months, Nian Di could already be carrying my child. He looked ready to start a fight. My parents stepped forward and whispered something to Lee Jun. He snorted coldly and walked away, clearly unwilling. The Lunar New Year had already passed. It was 25 days past the scheduled return date for high school seniors. Thankfully, it was only 25 days. My mom dug out a crumpled 200 yuan bill from the bottom of a drawer, counted it 3 times, and handed it to me. Nian Di, Mom knows you've always been a credit to us. Back then, when we were struggling financially, we didn't plan on sending you to high school. But you were so stubborn, you insisted on going and ended up ranking 2nd in the whole town. Your dad and I couldn't very well stand in your way, because the town's top high school offered you tuition and boarding waivers, plus a scholarship. You gave up the city's top model high school and came to Anshui High School here in our town. Mom has seen all of that. Hearing this, I slowly blinked my eyelashes. At that moment, it felt as though a million needles were piercing my heart at once, and a relentless, searing pain spread through every fiber of my being. Mom, you knew all this. Why did you give all my scholarship money to Zhong Yaozu so he could go out drinking and gambling? You know our family's situation. Take these 200 yuan. Mom believes you won't let us down. I took the 200 yuan and pursed my lips. Thank you, Mom. This was the first time my mom had ever given me so much money so readily. The night before I left, I lifted the mattress and took out the 750 yuan hidden inside. I'd saved this up over the past 2 years from tutoring. I took out 350 yuan and prepared to knock on my parents' door. Times are tough at home. Through the crack in the door, I could clearly hear my dad's relieved voice. Thank goodness you're so quick-witted. If that girl Nian Di hadn't passed the exam, she would have had to marry Li Jun in 3 months, and those 20,000 yuan would still be ours. My mom chuckled. With that 20,000, we'll just go out and adopt a baby boy. Do you think that'll cut off the Zhong family line? I lowered my gaze, withdrew my hand, and walked back to my room through the heavy night. Carrying a second-hand textbook I picked up at the recycling center, I rode a motorcycle for 3 hours to Anshui Middle School. When I arrived, everyone was still in morning reading. Out of breath, I carried the books up to the second-floor classroom. Upon entering, I found there was no longer a seat for me. The only empty desk at the back of the room was piled high with junk. The entire classroom fell silent the moment they saw me. I told you Zhong Ting was lying. Nian Di's grades are so good, there's no way she'd give up on the college entrance exam. TSK, TSK, TSK. Coming this late. Didn't her sister say she'd already gotten married? Just look at the way she's sitting, she's clearly no longer a young girl. The class monitor cleared his throat. Zhong Ni auntie, it's good to have you back. Everyone's in the final sprint for the college entrance exams right now, so they probably haven't had time to deal with the stuff on that desk. I scanned the classroom that had often appeared in my dreams from my past life and smiled faintly. I can handle it myself. I opened my book. Unsurprisingly, the knowledge that had been so vivid in my past life was now a blur. In the days that followed, I memorized the most basic concepts over and over again. My desk partner looked as if she'd discovered a new continent, exclaiming in surprise, Nian Di, why are you still memorizing this? We drilled this to death last semester. Liu Xiaoli, my cousin's friend, sat next to me, keeping a close eye on my every move. Hearing this, she stood up, crossed her arms, and said smugly, Ha, I bet you didn't know that. Zhong Ting told me that Zhong Nian Di has no intention of going to college at all. She's only taking the college entrance exam to scam the government's scholarship money. The class monitor couldn't stand it anymore and said sternly, Liu Xiaoli, the college entrance exam is an opportunity for every student to change their destiny. Don't make a joke of it. Liu Xiaoli replied contemptuously, Class monitor, I'm telling the truth. Zhong Nian Di didn't even want to go to college, she was ready to get married. But her mom saw her good grades and thought she had a chance to get into a top-tier university, so she made Zhong Nian Di take the exam. Memorizing all this basic stuff now, it's probably just a guilty conscience, worrying that she'll forget everything the moment she steps into the exam hall. As soon as Liu Xiaoli spoke, The entire class turned their gaze toward me. Shock, curiosity, contempt. The class monitor looked at me hesitantly. "Zhongni auntie, is what Liu Xiaoli said true? If it isn't, I'll tell the teacher. I won't let Liu Xiaoli bully you." The class monitor looked at me earnestly, hoping I would say no. I gripped the pen in my hand tightly, hesitating to speak. Even though Liu Xiaoli is always picking on Zhongni auntie, what she said this time is way out of line. Exactly. How could Zhongni auntie be that kind of person? With how hard she studies, anyone can tell she's determined to get into college. Not necessarily. Zhongni auntie's always the last to pay her materials fees, and in winter she wears a tattered, drafty floral quilted jacket. You can tell her family is dirt poor. Maybe she really would do something like this for money. Whispers swirled around me, but I remained seated upright, calmly reading the materials in front of me, until a crisp male voice, tinged with subtle disgust, cut through the air. "Some people really are blinded by money. They'd give up the college entrance exam for it, or take it just for the money. How selfish and foolish." That voice belonged to Tang Shu. I hadn't spoken to Tang Shu since that encounter at the town market. My head was buzzing. I clenched my teeth and gripped the pen in my hand tightly. The entire class seemed to gravitate toward Tang Shu. The moment he spoke, it practically confirmed everything Liu Xiaoli had said. The looks the whole class gave me turned contemptuous and disdainful. Everyone instinctively distanced themselves from me. In the cafeteria, the moment I sat down, the people around me grabbed their food bowls and walked away as if I were a plague. When it was time to hand in assignments, my test papers and workbooks were left alone on the teacher's desk. The class trash can had been moved next to my seat, and piles of trash were spilling over to my feet. So what? I was always meant to walk this path alone. The corner of the classroom felt stifling. Sweat trickled from my forehead down to my cheeks. In a daze, I felt as if I had returned to that murky room. My hair was tangled with sticky beads of sweat, every nerve ending ached as if it were about to explode, yet the weight of my limbs grew lighter and lighter. In a daze, the man kept shouting, "Give birth quickly, I want to see my son." So, I flipped through the vocabulary book in my hands over and over, with no time to think about these changes. The first mock exam is here, and there are 65 days left until the college entrance exam. The results are out. Guess what rank a certain top student got? 49th place, second to last in the whole class. Ha ha ha, serves her right. When I saw the ranking, I breathed a huge sigh of relief. 509 points, I got all the points I should have on the basic section. After the results were released, my homeroom teacher called me into her office. She gave me a once-over and said, "Zhongni auntie, based on feedback from most of your classmates and discussions among the subject teachers, you'll need to pack your things and transfer to Class 7 after the exam." Class 7 was the worst performing class in the senior year. The academic atmosphere there was terrible, and fights, climbing over walls, and skipping class were commonplace. Most importantly, I unconsciously clenched the hem of my shirt. "Teacher, I'm not the lowest ranked student, and the school doesn't have a policy of expelling students based on grades." The homeroom teacher gave a dismissive chuckle. As the homeroom teacher of the school's model class, let me tell you this: my students must not only excel academically but also have impeccable character. Zhongni auntie, if you actually get accepted, you'll be a disgrace to the entire town. You'll ruin our school's reputation that we've built up over so many years. If you have any self-respect left, you should move out on your own. I opened my mouth, then returned to the classroom in silence. It was pointless to say anything now. The atmosphere in Class 7 was unusually quiet. The teacher lectured to an empty room while the students below dozed or stared blankly into space. My sleepy-eyed desk-mate rubbed his eyes, glanced at the clock on the classroom wall, then leaned back onto the desk and shook me. "Why bother studying? It's so much more comfortable to sleep in this weather." My hand holding the pen paused, but I didn't answer. 60 days until the college entrance exam. The lights went out in the classroom at 10 o'clock. Holding my study materials, I recited principles by the light of the street lamp. The mosquitoes were swarming, but I felt at peace. I still have 900 yuan in my pocket. I don't spend much on food: a 1 yuan steamed bun for breakfast, a 2 yuan plate of rice with greens for lunch, and a 3 yuan dish of stir-fried pork with cucumber for dinner. The biggest expense is study materials. They contain new question formats for the exam, so I have to buy them. If I don't have any fat in my system, I get hungry, and the cafeteria ladies' hands often shake when they're serving food. Girls don't eat much. Serving too much is a waste. At the serving window, the cafeteria lady shook half the rice off the spoon and scooped the remaining half into my bowl. A boy was standing next to me in line, and she served him a full scoop of rice and vegetables. I pointed to the boy next to me. "Auntie, it's the same 1 yuan meal. Why did you give the boy next to me so much?" The lady didn't even look up. Boys are growing and eat more. How can girls compare? I can eat that much too. Go on. Don't block the students behind you from getting their food. I sighed and prepared to carry my tray to the dining area. Nian Di. A familiar voice drew closer. I looked up, a flash of surprise crossing my eyes. "Xiaoye?" Zhongyu walked toward me. She was Aunt Li's youngest daughter, and we'd grown up together since childhood. Nian Di, I have a big appetite. 1 serving is too little, but 2 is a bit much. Could you help me out? Zhongyu said with a smile, holding out her bowl. I pursed my lips, hesitating. Thank you, but, Nian Di, we grew up together, don't be so formal. While we were eating, Zhongyu looked at me as if she wanted to say something but held back. Nian Di, I'm sorry I couldn't help you with the shift change. The people in class 1 are really out of line. I shook my head earnestly. It's not your fault. Xiao Yu, given my current situation, getting too close to me won't be good for you. The moment I sat down, the person next to me rolled her eyes, picked up her food tray, and walked away immediately. The long table was now empty, with only Zhongyu and me sitting there. Zhongyu gave the surroundings a cold glance and thrust her chopsticks forcefully into her rice bowl. A bunch of brainless rabble. Nian Di, I'm not afraid of them. I froze for a moment, a stinging sensation welling up in my eyes, but I still shook my head. Xiaoye, thank you. But let's not see each other for a while. Focus on your studies, you'll definitely get into a good university. If I weren't so slow to catch on, being forced to stand apart from the group in that particular little social circle would be agonizing. Zhongyu was innocent. Nian Di, no matter what, I support your decision, Zhongyu said after a moment of silence, her voice firm. In the days that followed, at every meal, even though Zhongyu didn't sit with me, she would always set aside a portion of her rice for me. May 10th, the second mock exam. After the exam, the homeroom teacher posted the score sheets on the front door of the classroom. My desk partner came back after checking her scores, her mouth agape in shock. 537 in the science section? My goodness, you could get into a top-tier university. Zhongni auntie, tell me the truth, did you come to our class just to throw mud at class 1's homeroom teacher? I looked up from my error notebook, blinking with a hint of amusement. You guess. After a round of systematic review, I'd gone over the basic concepts in my head twice, but I just couldn't figure out how to tackle some of the more advanced problems. I took my error notebook to the teacher's lounge and, putting on a brave face, asked each teacher in turn if they could give me a private lesson on these problems. Luckily, after going around the room, Ms. Yu, the grade-level coordinator, agreed to my request. Teacher Yu had been the one handling my tuition waiver application. This problem can be solved with a slight shift in perspective. How have your skills regressed so much? Take these practice sets home and work on them. With your current scores, there's absolutely no way you'll get into a top-tier university. After clearing up my confusion, Teacher Yu, her face stern, slammed a few sets of practice problems down on the desk. My face flushed, and I bowed respectfully to Ms. Yu. Thank you, teacher. I'll keep working hard. As I carried the test papers back to the classroom, Tang Shu blocked my path at the corner of the hallway. The boy lifted his eyelids and spoke with an ambiguous tone. Zhongni auntie, are you doing well in class 7? I was completely baffled. I answered honestly, as long as I can study, I'm happy in any class. Tang Shu paused for a moment, swallowed hard, and spoke somewhat awkwardly. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't expect the other students to treat you that way, or that the homeroom teacher would transfer you to class 7, which has the worst discipline. It doesn't matter anymore. I've already gotten used to the fact that I have no allies in this battle. I've got nothing else to do here, so I'm heading back. Just as I was about to walk away, my cousin suddenly popped out from around the corner. When she saw me, her eyes lit up. Without a word, she grabbed my sleeve and dragged me downstairs. Nian Di, your husband is looking for you downstairs. He can't find you and is calling out everywhere. You'd better go check it out. The hallway of the school building was packed with people, all craning their necks to look downstairs with curiosity. Li Jun was carrying a grey plastic bag over his shoulder. He looked as if he'd just come in from the fields. His yellow rubber boots were caked with mud, and his bald head gleamed with grease. The strong body odor wafting from him made a few of the bolder boys gathered around him gag. I walked up with a coy smile, my voice just the right amount of sweet. Brother Jun, you're here. Have you missed me these past few weeks? Li Jun flashed a row of yellow teeth and handed me the plastic bag. Last week, Leah's wife in the village cleared out a batch of clothes. She's about your size. As he spoke, Li Jun gave my chest a meaningful look and chuckled softly. I figured you could wear them too, so I grabbed a few for you. Go home and change into them, don't wear those same two outfits all the time. It's an embarrassment to me, Li Jun. I took the bag firmly and nodded obediently. Okay, I've already made arrangements with your parents. I'll pick you up from school on the afternoon of June 8th. We'll go straight back to our place, and I'll get a taste of you first. The security guard quickly noticed the commotion and urged Li Jun to leave. After Li Jun left, my cousin, who had been hiding behind a pillar, hurried over, snatched the plastic bag from my hands, and dumped its contents onto the ground. Sis, let me see what your husband sent you. He really spoils you, doesn't he? A few old-fashioned floral blouses, baggy, misshapen skirts, and several worn-out, threadbare undergarments fell out of the plastic bag. An older man giving these things to a young girl couldn't help but spark speculation. A chorus of boos and ahs rippled through the crowd. Some good-for-nothing boys stared at my chest with bold, lecherous gazes. I glanced at the clothes scattered on the ground, walked forward slowly, and cracked my knuckles. Didn't your mom ever tell you not to touch other people's stuff? Smack. The slap was delivered with full force, the sound crisp and loud. You dare hit me? My cousin covered her face in disbelief, stamping her feet in fury. Zhongni auntie, don't you dare think you'll get into a top-tier university and rake in the money just because you're in class 7. You'll be crying your eyes out after the college entrance exams. I curled my lips into a faint smile. Then let's look forward to it together. There were 15 days left until the college entrance exam. My score on the third mock exam was 552. At 10 p.m., the lights in the classrooms and dormitories were turned off on schedule. I clutched my review materials and, as usual, made my way to the streetlight next to the dormitory. As I reached point 107, a large hand silently clamped over my mouth and nose, pressing down on me as it tried to drag me away. Instinctively, I bit down hard on the arm and struggled desperately. Help me, stop pretending. You're not a virgin anyway. What's wrong with playing along with me just this once? The man sneered contemptuously. In the blink of an eye, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. It was Tang Shu. He stood quietly not far away, his backpack slung over his shoulder, gazing at me with an ambiguous expression. The man behind me clamped his hand over my mouth again. As our eyes met, I looked at him pleadingly. Save me, save me. Tang Shu walked away. The thug pinned me against a small corner behind the dormitory building. I groped around on the ground and picked up a rock, which I hurled at the man's head. The man let go of me in pain. Finally, security arrived and subdued the man. The commotion drew a large crowd of students who gathered to watch. Under the glaring light of a flashlight, I stood before the crowd with my hair disheveled and my clothes in disarray. They must have said something else, probably words like slut or whore. I didn't care. It would all be over soon. It poured with rain during the 2 days of the college entrance exams. The students from Anshui High School didn't take the exam at their own school, but at Anshui No. 2 High School, 2 blocks away. The school set up a row of awnings and escorted the students onto the buses. On the afternoon of the English exam, I pulled the remaining 350 yuan from my pillowcase and put it in my backpack along with my ID card. Just as I was about to step through the bus door, Zhongyu ran toward me with an umbrella and shoved 200 yuan into my hand. Zhongni auntie, You have to live well. With that, she ran off without looking back. I looked down at the bills in my hand, and tears fell in big, heavy drops. The bell signaling the end of the exam rang, and I snapped the cap back on my pen. With 550 yuan tucked in my pocket and my backpack on my back, I walked out of Anshui No. 2 High School and boarded the northbound train.